Coming up on this episode, Lester Quinones struggles in his opening two games at the FIBA World Cup and plotting a rotation for the Warriors and Steve Kerr as we prepare for next season. Yes, welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. The 2023 FIBA World Cup is now underway in Japan, the Philippines, and Indonesia. And for me, from a Australian perspective, a disappointing start, really. Well, a reasonable start, beating Finland and Larry Market in game one. But last night for me, Australian time, we went down to the Germans, a Franz Wagnerless German team. So that was an incredibly disappointing result. Team USA, a slow start for them in their first group game against New Zealand. We're down double digits in the opening period, but as expected, ended up getting the job done very comfortably in a 99-72 victory. France, though, the big surprise, a huge defeat at the hands of Canada in their opening game, and then again for me last night, Australian time, they lose to Latvia, who were without Kristaps Porzingis, meaning the French, one of the favourites for the tournament, obviously outside the Americans and probably the Canadians. They are now out and will not make the knockout phase of the tournament in quite a shock. Obviously, Evan Fournier, Rudy Gobert, Nick Batum and the likes, obviously not playing with Victor Wembanyama, and we're still waiting to see kind of the status for Joel Embiid and who he's going to potentially play for come the Olympics next year. But obviously, from a Warrior perspective, we've got Steve Kerr as head coach of Team USA, but we've got, of course, Lester Quinones as well, playing for the Dominican Republic alongside Karl Anthony Towns, and it's been a pretty disappointing start for Lester, unfortunately. The 22-year-old has started both games for the Dominicans, but has failed to really have any impact. So game one against the Philippines, the host nation, he played 15 minutes and 50 seconds, just 2 points on 2 for 4 from the free throw line, did not make any of his 4 field goal attempts, 3 of which came from beyond the arc. He had 3 rebounds and a steal in the 87-81 victory. His defense was a little bit better than his offense, but that wasn't hard to do. His offense really didn't come in the same way as we saw in Summer League, obviously, with the Warriors throughout that campaign in Las Vegas. And of course with the Warriors in their G League program with Santa Cruz last season as well, where he was the G League's most improved player. Thought we might be able to see something a little bit better again last night for me, early hours for those of you in America, taking on Italy. They got the win again, the Dominicans, in that one, winning the game 87-82. But it was even worse for Lester Quinones, unfortunately. 22-year-old guard had 2 points, 2 for 2 from the free throw line, was 0 for 3 from the field, 0 for 2 from three-point range. But the real talking point in this one was the fact that he played 7 minutes and 47 seconds in the opening period. Again, started the game like he did in game one against the Philippines, and then played a grand total of 19 seconds for the remaining 3 quarters. And some of that included the late period of the game where he did make those 2 clutch free throws with, I think, 17 seconds remaining to help seal the win for the Dominican Republic. But still, clearly, he drew the ire of head coach Nestor Garcia there in the opening period and was benched, basically, for all but 19 seconds in the opening 3 quarters. So a disappointing start for Lester Quinones. It's always interesting to me to watch NBA players, I guess, go and play for their national team in these environments. Some really thrive off it. I know for me, being an Australian, Patty Mills goes from a genuine role player with NBA teams to a genuine star in tournaments like these with increased usage, increased shooting volume and stuff with Australia. So there's that kind of the equation. But there's also other players, and particularly young players who are in a situation like Lester Quinones is in. And I have a little bit of sympathy for him here because he's not like he's an NBA player. He's on a 2-way contract, but he's only, I think, played 4 times on an NBA floor. He's yet to establish himself in the league. He's yet to make a main roster in the league. And so for him, you really have to question if there isn't the internal motivation to play for his country, which I'm sure there is, but there's different value to that depending on who you are and where you are in your career. And for him, really his career is going to be about, hopefully for him, playing a 10, 12 plus year career in the NBA, making millions and millions of dollars. And for him at this point, why would you go out and really put your body on the line, risk potential injury, when that, of course, would risk your career in the NBA, risk millions of dollars, and your whole future going forward? So it is a tough one for me. Like, we obviously saw Josh Hart with Team USA. He was up for a contract extension with the New York Knicks this offseason, and he, in some of the warm-up games for Team USA, he didn't actually partake. He didn't enter the game until I think it was after the first couple of warm-up games where it was actually official that he signed that extension with the Knicks. So that was obviously a financial thing where Josh Hart didn't want to get injured and potentially ruin his contract extension with the Knicks. And I think that's a part of this for every player, but particularly those young players in the NBA who stand to make millions and millions of dollars but are yet to secure that kind of contract. It's just how much value and how much you're willing to put your body on the line in tournaments like these are a real question mark. And I'm sure there are other players that are playing for the Dominican Republic who know that they're probably never going to make the NBA. That's just probably the reality of where they're at in their career. And therefore, they're more willing to put their body on the line for their country and try as hard as they can, really, because the risks aren't necessarily there like there is for Lester Quinones. So it's really interesting for me, the kind of dynamic at play with young players and going to play for their national teams. You know, you look at someone like Karl Anthony Towns, who's playing for the Dominican Republic. He's got his money. He's got his bag, right? He's going to make hundreds of millions of dollars across the course of his career. And so, you know, he's out here dominating for the Dominican Republic, and there's no surprise about that. He's one of the best players in the world, for starters, and the fact that he can have a fair crack without the risk of losing out on millions of dollars moving forward. So I think, you know, as much as we as fans would like to think, oh no, they should be playing for their country, they should be, really putting their body on the line, competing as hard as they can, and that should be enough of a motivation for them. You know, at the end of the day, this is a player's job, this is their career, and they want to be trying to make as much money as they can to set themselves up for the future. And of course, when you're talking about this kind of money, you're talking about generational wealth and setting up their family, not only now, but for generations to come. So I do think it's an interesting element at play, that is for sure. But hopefully that Lester Quinones can get back to some form here. Obviously, the Dominicans winning their first two games, they're through to the knockout stage now. So their last group game against Angola on Tuesday is going to be basically a dead rubber for them. And hopefully that provides Lester with the kind of pressure-free opportunity where he can go out and just show his skills, because we know what he did in Summer League, where he averaged 21.2 points, 4.6 rebounds, and 5.2 assists across those 5 games in Las Vegas. Clearly showed that he's above the level of NBA Summer League, and I think he should be one of the better players at this tournament as well, at the FIBA World Cup. And hopefully we get to see that against Angola on Tuesday. Hopefully see a few shots going from beyond the arc, maybe get him to 15, 20 points, and really get some momentum and some confidence up before they enter the knockout stages. I'm sure Lester would be pretty frustrated with how he's performed in the opening 2 games, but he's not the only one, I guess, throughout this World Cup. And for Steve Kerr as coach of Team USA, he's got a really tough job on his hands. Obviously, he's managed, a raft of star-level personalities for the Golden State Warriors across the best part of the last decade. However, going into a Team USA environment with this amount of talent, it's certainly a different experience altogether, and him obviously taking the reins as head coach for the first time in a major tournament like this. And we've already seen Pelicans star Brandon Ingram come out and express his frustration at the role that he's playing so far throughout the warm-up games and in the opening game against New Zealand, where we had 10 of the 12 players for Team USA playing between 15 and 25 minutes. So I think Steve's really trying to share the love, spread the load, at least in the early games before we get to the knockout stages, where obviously it becomes a do-or-die clash where you might need to tighten your rotation a little bit. But obviously for Brandon Ingram, played over 15 minutes, but only took 4 shot attempts. Stark contrast, he averaged a career-high 18.6 field goal attempts per game with the Pelicans last season. So it's frustrating for him, and I'm sure there's a lot of players at Team USA who are not necessarily struggling, but trying to acclimatise to a different experience here than what they do have with their NBA team, where they have a more of a star level role, that is for sure. So I tweeted out a few days ago just my early thoughts about a potential Warrior rotation here for Steve Kerr heading into next season. Obviously, the playing time is going to be really interesting for Golden State next season with their veteran core, and obviously a couple of these younger players who are still trying to forge careers for themselves in the NBA. So these are just early thoughts of mine. Not a whole lot of time put into them, but a few points that I wanted to consider here. And if you have any feedback, any thoughts on these, then make sure to tweet me at POK252. That's POK252 on Twitter, or if you're listening to this on YouTube, of course, you can comment down below. But obviously, we've got the starters in Steph, Clay, Wiggs, Dre, and Loon. That would be my starting lineup heading into next season. Obviously, we're going to have constant speculation here about Chris Paul and whether he's going to come in and start. I don't think that should happen. The sooner we get that over and done with and have that decided, the better, I think, for the Warriors. I don't think that needs to be a discussion that should be had all up until we get to the opening night against the Suns on October 24. That should be hopefully something that gets sorted and, I guess, reported and revealed by early in training camp. Let's hope that that's the case and that CP3 doesn't make too much of an issue out of it, which I think when it comes down to the crux of it, I think Steve, as a coach, has got enough respect, obviously, in the locker room and around the league, and I think, with Chris Paul, hopefully, that'll be a comfortable decision that he and everyone in the Warriors arrives at. So if we look at that, it's going to be interesting because a lot of these minutes for the starters, they played more than this last season. I think that was just because of where the Warriors were at, playing behind the 8 ball from early on when they started the season at 3-7 after the opening 10 games. They were really, players like Steph when he was there and not injured. Obviously, he had those 2 injuries during the season, but when he was fit and healthy, he took on a big workload. Dre, Loon took on big workloads. Clay as well, particularly when Steph was out. So for me, I don't really want to see anyone playing more than 32 minutes a game next season. And I think if we can manage players to that kind of maximum, then I think that's going to indicate that we're in a really good situation. So Steph and Wiggs would be my 2 players that play around 32 minutes per game next season. Obviously, Steph is the best player, and for Wiggs, I think he plays a crucial role there as that two-way forward. We're not sure what we're necessarily going to get from JK and Moody. Obviously, we're really optimistic about what they could provide next season, but as young players, their form will obviously fluctuate throughout the course of the season. And obviously, Wiggs, being 28 years old, being before last season an incredibly durable player, I think he's more than capable of obviously playing around that mark again. I've got Dre and Clay both at 29 minutes per game. I'm just really worried about Dre, and I think it's a constant issue with him having to play a lot of minutes as a small ball 5 during the regular season. Obviously, it's a really effective lineup the majority of the time, but I think it's something you want to limit before you get to the postseason. I just don't want him to be overworked in a way that he was last season and really not having the energy for what is hopefully a long playoff campaign. Clay, similar kind of thing, obviously. He should hopefully be better again next season coming off those 2 major injuries, but at 33 years old, you don't necessarily want to be putting too much mileage on him, and we saw against the Lakers in that second round of the post-season, he was absolutely cooked. I think averaged 10 points over the last 4 games on like 25% shooting or something like that. He was absolutely gassed. It was unfortunate, but it was one of the key reasons why we ended up losing that series. If Clay, shot averagely, like not even above average, just what in his 40%. Career average, then we probably win that series. We probably win Game 4, at least in LA. Win Game 5. We're probably heading to that Game 6 in LA up 3-2, and from there, we're probably more likely to win the series than not. So we've got those 4. CP3, I've got at 25 minutes per game. He's obviously going to be the biggest fascinating point, obviously with the role and everything there. So with that, I've got him and Steph playing 9 minutes together, basically. Because if we assume that Steph's going to play 32, then that leaves 16 for CP to be the primary point guard. And then, obviously, if I'm giving CP3 25 minutes per game, then that's an additional 9 on top of the 16 without Steph. So it's obviously going to be interesting to see how much CP plays overall. But even more, I think, fascinating is going to be how much he plays with Steph and how effective that can be. I think we all think it can be really effective, but is it going to be a combination in a small ball lineup? Is it going to be able to be out there for 15, 20 minutes a game, or is it just something where I think it's more so going to be an 8 to 12 minute kind of arrangement there on any given night? But obviously it'll determine on how those two are performing and who their opponents are in that particular game. Moving on from CP3, so I've got Loon at 24 minutes, so obviously half a game. You can have him for the opening 6 minutes of the first quarter, the back 6 minutes of the second quarter, and then the same over the second half. Again, I would love the Warriors to add another big here with the 14th roster spot. I do think that it's important that Loon doesn't play all 82 games again now. You get to a situation like he has where he's played 2 full seasons now without missing, and it really becomes a driving force. And it really becomes a record that you want to hold on to and extend. And I just think it's important that we look at the bigger picture here and that we don't necessarily put Loon out there for games that he doesn't need to be in, which I just thought that happened at times last season. I thought that the priority of getting Loon to playing all 82 games overlooked the fact of, we're trying to win a championship here. And I think that's hugely important. So when you're resting Steph and you're resting CP and you're resting Dre and you're resting Clay, why is Loon still out there? Like, why is he having to play those random, Wednesday night games or Thursday night games in Detroit or wherever it may be? Why is he playing those games? I don't see a reason to. He's a veteran now, and I just think he's so important to the way that Golden State and this roster is formulated right now, in the fact that if he goes down with injury, who is coming in and stepping into his role and being able to fill it as effectively as he does? So I just think he's so important, which means I would limit him to 24 minutes a game, and I just don't think he should be playing more than probably 75 games next season. Then that's my max. I'd probably prefer him down at 65 to 70. If he's playing more than 75 games next season, that's telling me that the Warriors are in a tough spot again, and they've really needed him to battle through and grind through a long regular season. So I'm just hoping that that's not the case. Now we're getting to some of these younger guys, obviously from 7 to 10. This is a 10-man rotation I'm kind of working with at the moment. JK, I've got at 22 minutes. Moses Moody, I've got at 17 minutes. So a couple of things here. Ideally, those guys will play more than 22 and 17 minutes per game each. Like, they will play more, I think, simply because you're going to have a lot of nights where Steph and or CP and or Dre and or Clay are resting, and therefore you need the young guys to come in and take a bigger role, a bigger responsibility. And so, for Jonathan Kuminga, for example, he averaged 21 minutes a game last regular season. Well, going into year 3, you'd expect him to take a bigger jump again. Could he get up to 25 minutes per game? Possibly, yes. But in terms of a fully healthy rotation on any given night, I think he's about 22 a game, maybe slightly less, maybe a little bit more. Obviously, with JK and with how Steve manages him, I think it's really about how he's going in a particular game and how he starts a game, which is really important. Like, Steve at this point doesn't have huge trust in him, so if he comes out in the first quarter or early in the second quarter and he's struggling a little bit, then you're probably going to see his minutes in the second half, reduce quite significantly. He's not an absolutely locked part of the rotation where Steve is giving him a set amount of minutes at set amount of times, during games. But I do think that hopefully he can get to a stage where Steve realizes and acknowledges that, hey, I need to have this guy out there for at least 20 minutes a game, regardless of who else is available and how he's performing in that particular game. That hopefully he'll be able to impact games regardless of if his shot's not falling or whatever it is. I think, and that's particularly where the defense comes into it for JK, is if he can just have a huge defensive impact, then hopefully that can push into the offensive side of his game, and Steve can really gather that trust in him. And again, it's going to be really interesting to see how Chris Paul can impact JK's game, particularly offensively, and if he can find a role there on a consistent basis, hopefully, as I said, he can get at least 20 minutes per game, kind of locked in as part of the rotation, and then potentially pushing up closer to 25 from that as well. So I've got him at 22 right now heading into next season. Moses Moody at 17, so I've got him ahead of Gary Payton II, who I had down here for 15 minutes per game. Look, I think it's important that Moses plays more than GP2. I just think he's got a better ceiling, I guess, for his NBA career going forward here. Maybe things might switch in the playoffs where you come up a particular opponent or whatever where GP2 is going to be more important. But I just think for the regular season here, I just think that Moses is going to need to play more for his development and for where he can potentially reach in his NBA career. And if he doesn't, again, that's a sign that there's probably been a bit of a stagnation there for Moses, and it's probably a sign that, hey, the Warriors are struggling and that Steve is going to have to rely upon GP2 a little bit more than what you may like. So looking forward to seeing what Moses Moody can do next season. Obviously, his end to last season was really positive late in the regular season, then obviously into the playoffs where he played pretty meaningful minutes for the Warriors against the Lakers in the second round. GP2 I've got at 15 and Dario Saric I've got at 15. Now these are two guys that could certainly play bigger roles. Obviously, as I said with GP2, you're going to have particular opponents where someone like a Ja Morant or Donovan Mitchell or whoever it is might be getting off the chain, and you need GP2 in there for 20 to 25 minutes in order to try and cut them down a little bit and put some pressure on. And then for Dario Saric, obviously, I think he's got a really important role here. Obviously, he'll play some small ball minutes at the 5, so I've really got all his minutes probably at the 5 here. Like if you have Loon for 24 minutes and Saric for 15, that's 39. Then maybe 9 minutes of Dre as a small ball 5 to round out that 48. And then obviously we're going to get sprinklings, I think, here of Trace Jackson-Davis as well. And then the 14th roster spot is open, and I expect that might go to a big, and so you could throw them into the equation as well. So I think this is a pretty conservative mark for Dario Saric, simply because we saw in that second round series against the Lakers, Steve Kerr got really desperate to find some front court shooting without necessarily downsizing, and that's why we saw JaMychal Green start a couple of games against the Lakers. Had a little bit of productiveness early, but didn't eventuate, and then we saw GP2 come into the starting lineup over the last 3 games of that series in place of Kevon Looney, obviously. But I think Draymond, Dario front court, kind of the 4-5 positions, could be an interesting combination given their ability, obviously, as playmakers to handle the ball a little bit. We saw Dario do that with Croatia in the FIBA pre-Olympic qualifying tournament. And obviously he provides the shooting that I think Steve is, as I said, does get desperate for at times without, downsizing. And, previously it was, Jordan Poole 3 guard lineups alongside Steph and Clay. But obviously next season it's going to be CP, Steph and Clay. And if that kind of combination, playing those 3 wigs and Dre isn't working out, then I think Dario is a player that could fill a lot of lineups as that 5th guy alongside the core 4 of, Steph, Clay, Wiggs and Dre. So interested to see how it all pans out from a Warrior perspective. Hopefully there's not too many injuries throughout the course of the season that kind of, mixes things up here a little bit in a way that you don't want. So it's going to be a big season ahead, obviously. Looking forward to it. As I said before, if you've got any comments on this rotation that I've kind of planned out here or mapped out early on, still obviously nearly 2 months till the start of the season, just gone under the 60-day mark here. So still a lot to play out, still a lot to happen with the roster, and still a lot to happen in training camp. Other than that, guys, please subscribe on YouTube, leave me a comment and like on this video. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can follow there. That would be greatly appreciated. And you can always tweet me at POK252, POK252 on Twitter. Other than that, I'll catch you in the next episode.